every 100 people are vaccinated against measles, that's still enough to allow an epidemic to occur, because every one person that gets infected will infect potentially 100 others, and if 99 are protected, they won't get it, but the other one will, and will pass the infection on. So all the people who are not immunised will be at risk.
Right.
So that's a second reason, which is not a particularly good one, but you can understand why people think that, especially for infections which are not as infectious as measles. Measles is incredibly infectious, but most infections are not that infectious. The third reason why people think that is that they've listened to somebody who's had supposedly an adverse reaction to a vaccine. You know, they're persuaded by their neighbour saying, when my little kid got it, then he had convulsions afterwards.
Yeah.
Now, that's a rare complication of the measles vaccine, for example. Quite often the febrile convulsions turn out to be occurring with or without the vaccine. But the story gets around, and Mrs. Smith's daughter got into real trouble after vaccination, and wouldn't it be better just not to be vaccinated?
Right.
Those people are persuaded very rapidly when an epidemic of the infection occurs, for example, with the whooping cough epidemics we've had recently, that their kids really ought to be vaccinated. But it takes the infection to do it. And then there's a small group of people who basically just have a set of disbeliefs about how the world works. They don't believe in the infectious nature of disease, for example. They have an animistic approach to why people get disease. It's punishment from God, or it's against my religion, or whatever.
Yeah.
And they just have these fixed beliefs, and by and large, they stay fixed.
Yeah, yeah. You've mentioned that one of the reasons that people tend not to immunize their children is, like you said, there isn't polio in the country. But if there was, it would obviously, people would be flocking to be vaccinated. Can you paint a picture as to what some of these things look like, polio and measles and so on, for people who aren't inclined?
Yeah, measles is, in most people's mind, dismissed as just a spotty skin disease. And for many people who get measles, that's all it is. But 1 in 1,000 will get a serious internal complication, and 1 in 100,000 will be left with major brain damage as a result of measles infection. So that measles, if you're the unlucky one, is not a trivial disease. And in fact, more people die worldwide of measles than of any other infection apart from diarrheal disease. It's quite a significant problem, particularly for young kids. Indeed, that's why we push to get kids vaccinated as early as possible in the developing world, because the risk of measles killing you is greatest when you're between the ages of 0 and 2. Polio, well, for 99 people out of 100, polio is a diarrheal illness which goes away after a couple of days. But for 1 in 100 people, it leads to paralysis, maybe of a leg or an arm. If you're really unlucky, it paralyzes your vocal muscles. And of course, the paralysis is permanent because the nerves that work these muscles are destroyed by the virus. So that's why people used to end up on respirators for the whole of their lives, because they were basically left unable to breathe for themselves. Another vaccine that I've been involved with, of course, is the vaccine for cervical cancer. And again, the virus that causes the cancer, for 98 people out of 100, it's a trivial infection. They never know they've had it. Yeah. But for the 2% of people that get persisting infection, they can go on and get a cancer which will kill them. Yeah. And if it's not detected early enough, it's a lethal infection. In fact, papillomavirus kills more people worldwide. 250,000 people worldwide die every year as a result of papillomavirus infection. So that's a very significant burden. It's the 9th commonest cause of infectious disease death.
Wow. One of the issues that we're dealing with in the course is the idea of cancer clusters. So these are quite common. We even had a case, I think, in 2006 in Brisbane. Have you had much experience? Do you know the phenomenon or why they tend to pop up?
When I sat on the International Agency for Cancer Research's Scientific Advisory Board for a few years, this was one of the topics that used to come up regularly. It related to use of mobile phones, it related to stuff being discharged from factories. Some cancer clusters are very real. Environmental pollutants can produce a cancer cluster, and sometimes those cancer clusters are the first evidence that a particular chemical that can cause a cancer. Minimato disease, for example, is an example where toxic pollution produced a whole swathe of cancers, and then the Bhopal disaster as well, where there was a release of methyl cyanide, I think it was, into the environment, and that produced a whole cluster of cancers. But most of the